Today we have the pleasure of being joined by both Al Iverson and Sandro Casito. Al is Valley Mail's industry research and community engagement lead with long experience in email marketing, technology, deliverability. His goals are securing email, protecting against phishing and spoofing, and helping good emails get delivered. And he's published his email deliverability blog, Spam Resources, since 2001. And Sandro here brings his expertise in political and nonprofit email campaigns, CRM technology, and deliverability best practices to help our clients reach their goals. He's dedicated to maximizing email deliverability and efficiency for our customers so that they can focus more of their time and resources on their impactful work. So, with that, I want to pass it to you all. Thank you both for joining us this afternoon here.
Thank you, Ashley. Hi, everybody. Al Iverson here. As Ashley said, I work for a DMARC provider called Valley, where I lead our industry research and community engagement efforts. A little bit of data, a little bit of email deliverability, because email deliverability is really my background. I have been sending marketing emails or email of one type or another going all the way back to the late 1990s.
Yeah, and hi everyone. I'm Sandro. I'm the email deliverability manager for Bonterra. I manage our sending infrastructure, and I work with clients who may have deliverability challenges or just want more information about best practices. I'm also a big fan of Spam Resource, Al's blog, so you should check it out. But thanks for coming, everyone.
Thanks, Sandro. All right, so here's what we're going to cover today. It's all about deliverability and reputation. We'll explain what that means. What are the components that make up the filters that decide whether or not you're going to get delivered to the inbox or the spam filter or blocked and not delivered at all. The things that go out into all of this, right? It's email laws, it's best practices, it's specific sender requirements. We'll talk about those rules for mailbox providers, give you an overview of domain reputation, how that works, what that means, talk more about good practices versus not so good practices, how that impacts your ability to get mail delivered successfully, ways you can sort of test and check to make sure that you've got everything correct from a technical perspective and how to monitor your sending reputation. And then we'll have plenty of time at the end for Q&A to be able to answer your questions as well. All right, so here's where we're going to start. It's all about today, all about what we're talking about today is deliverability and reputation. And when we say deliverability, we're talking about the measurement, the study, the practice of getting email delivered to the inbox successfully, right? There's email delivery, right? A mail server hands it off to another mail server. A platform hands it off to Gmail or Outlook or Yahoo. But deliverability is whether or not that mail gets delivered to the inbox or the spam folder. And there's a whole bunch of different measures and metrics that go into that. Deliverability is both technical and strategic, right? You've got to have certain header settings, certain authentication bits in place and configured properly. The send platform helps a lot with that. But in addition with setting up those technical bits, strategy also applies too, where you have to basically send wanted mail. If you don't send wanted mail, there are no sort of technical settings that are going to override a deliverability problem. Mailbox providers are really driven by wanting to make their users happy. Gmail users don't want to see unwanted mail in their inbox. And so that's why Google has a very complicated, very big, very detailed machine learning black box that decides whether or not to take your email message and place it in the inbox or place it in the spam folder. And that's informed by signs and signals, right? The feedback from subscribers, complaints, opens, clicks, interactions, and positive and negative signals too, kind of all feed into that black box that sort of make up the deliverability equation. And we'll touch more on the details of that here in a second.
Yeah, and this kind of gets more into detail about what Al was talking about. There are really three key components to making sure that your mail is delivered successfully and makes it to the inbox. The good news about Bonterra is that we handle most of the technical requirements for you, with the exception of email authentication, which we'll talk a bit more about later. But regardless of what Bonterra products you go with, if you decide to use us, we handle bounce processing, unsubscribes, and we make sure that we follow all of the mailbox provider technical requirements to make sure that mail is delivered successfully. But really, when we're talking about deliverability and like getting into the inbox, the most important thing is kind of your mail strategy. So that's like setting proper expectations for when someone opts into your list. Like, are you letting them know, hey, we're going to send you 2 emails a week about X, Y, and Z. Here's how you can easily opt out. And make sure that the people who are on your list like want the mail that you're sending, so you can kind of manage them through kind of the whole life cycle of your program. And that strategy is really what drives the signals that you send to mailbox providers. So if you're maybe over including recipients, maybe somebody just doesn't want your mail, they may unsubscribe or mark you as spam. It'll lower your engagement and kind of make it much harder for you to have like a successful deliverability strategy. And in kind of extreme cases, lead to block listings or elevated bounce rates because a mailbox provider has decided, hey, we don't want to accept your mail anymore. So that strategy element is super important, probably the most important thing.
So where does the law fit into this? And CAN spam is the governing U.S. federal law, effectively covering email marketing. It affects advocacy, marketing and mailing, political fundraising to some degree, and other stuff as well. But when you are sending bulk mail, you're signing up for an email sending platform. CAN spam is a significant is the significant U.S. law that you have to comply with. The requirements under CAN spam are pretty simple. It's a mix of stuff you have to be aware of and platforms have to be aware of. Um, and it's very common sense. It's very easy to comply with CAN spam. Make it easy to unsubscribe. Don't don't put false or deceiving content in the message or in message headers. In other words, don't put "help, I'm on fire" in the subject line. Right? It's like yelling fire in a theater. It's not okay under the law. That's one of the bright lines there is don't deceive with the email you're sending. CAN spam also sets an opt-in standard that is commonly used by just about every mailbox provider out there. Talk more on what that means in a second. But that standard is affirmative consent. And that means clear opt-in, a sign-up initiated by the user. You didn't opt them in, you didn't sign them up. They took that step to give you their email address and indicate that they want to get mail from you. Now, CAN spam is just one of the things that matter overall in this deliverability equation. So to that end, CAN spam compliance alone does not guarantee that you're going to get mail delivered to the inbox. Do keep in mind, though, that if you're not compliant with CAN spam, you're going to have a lot of trouble getting email delivered successfully. And you even put yourself at legal risk as well. Our lawsuits under CAN spam super common? No, but they do happen. And you don't want to be one of the exceptions there that costs you a lot of money and really damages your email efforts. Also keep in mind too that sometimes deliverability involves reaching out to a Yahoo or a Gmail or a Microsoft for help. And if they look at your mail and they see that it's not CAN spam compliant, they are not going to assist you in any way. Also, there is, if you think of some of the gray marketing or lesser well done email marketing and mail you see out there, they'll brag that they're CAN spam compliant, and that's really not the gold star that they're sort of pretending that it is. Like I said, CAN spam compliance is so easy. It's ground floor table stakes. Everybody should be sending CAN spam compliant mail. So lots of CAN spam compliant mail gets blocked every day because it's not the only thing that goes into whether or not a mail gets delivered or not. So remember that CAN spam is a starting point, definitely not the finish line when it comes to compliance and best practices for bulk email. So mailbox providers, right? When I use the phrase mailbox providers or inbox providers, sometimes I might even say internet service providers. Who do I mean? And I mean anybody that hosts wide swaths of consumer email boxes. That would be Yahoo Mail. That would be MicrosoftOutlook.com. That'd be Gmail by Google. A whole bunch of others down there too, right? Apple's iCloud Mail, Comcast, and all over the world. There's hundreds of them, thousands of them, right? But generally speaking, they all, though they are different companies run in different places in the world, they all are sort of coalescing to very similar standards for what types of bulk mail they will allow and not allow. And to that end, they all generally require opt-in permission, low complaint rates, and encourage you as a sender to have high positive engagement. Engagement meaning people interacting with your email messages. That's when we talked about signs and signals before. That's a very strong signal, a good indicator that people want your mail is that they're interacting with it. They're opening the message, they're reading it, they're not throwing it in the trash, they're not reporting it as spam, but they're actually clicking on the links in the email. To help improve the quality of mail being sent to their subscribers, Yahoo and Gmail last year in October published new sender requirements that were basically evolutionary, not revolutionary, and that they basically took a bunch of understood but poorly documented best practices and turned them into documented requirements. And so there was they published this on Gmail's requirements and documentation. Yahoo Mail did the same. The highlights there were really around email authentication, making sure mail is really easily identifiable as you. That really helps mailbox providers in that a lot of bad guys try to deceive people and send bad stuff. It's not about marketing mail. It's not about advocacy mail. It's really about phishing and spoofing and fake stuff, the real bad guy stuff. So to make your mail easier to identify as good, that's where these new sender requirements come in to make it so that Yahoo and Gmail, and by extension others, can readily, more easily identify you as the sender of an email message. Because if they can identify the sender reliably, then they're much better able to determine the reputation of the sender. If the identity is in question, you can attach a reputation to that identity. And so that's the goal with these new sender requirements, to make it better, easy to identify good mail, to let more of it through, while better identifying bad mail, to let less of it through. So the requirements there, you go to more details, that could be a whole separate presentation on its own. There's a link to the Gmail requirements there if you want to dive deep into it. But ultimately, it's stuff that I would characterize as common sense. Don't send as Gmail or Yahoo. You go send as your own domain. We can't really, in this modern age with email authentication and security requirements, and it's a very complex thing to try to send to somebody else's domain. So you really need to stick to domains that you own or control or are allowed to use. Must authenticate that mail with the common everyday standard authentication protocols for email. That's sender policy framework and domain keys identified mail. That's what SPF and DKIM stand for. And then there's this newer add-on technology called DMARC, domain-based messaging, authentication, reporting, and conformance. Please say that 10 times fast. And boy, it took me forever to memorize that, in case you're wondering. But what DMARC does, and that's the whole point of the company I work for, is we help people with stuff like this, is a DMARC helps protect domains against phishing and spoofing. And so Yahoo's and Gmail's goal is to help make it harder for bad guys to trick their users based on falsity in email messages. And DMARC helps prohibit a specific type of falsity through spoofing and phishing by faking from addresses to be other domains. That last bullet point there too, again, it's just keep complaints under 0.1%. Again, another common sense thing where it's, if people want your mail, they're not going to complain about it. The more expected, the more permission-based your mail is, the lower spam complaints are going to be. So complaint rate is a very important metric for mailbox providers to figure out what mail they think should be delivered to the inbox and what mail should not be delivered to the inbox.
Yeah, and just to add on to that briefly, I think in the past it was kind of like a stadium effect, where if you were a sender who wasn't really following best practices and you didn't authenticate with SPF and DKIM or DMARC, it was a lot harder for a mailbox provider like Gmail or Yahoo to pick you out from the crowd and categorize you appropriately. And now that these requirements are in effect, it's a lot easier to kind of like pull you out and assign a reputation based on what you're doing. Because really, in deliverability, there are kind of two buckets of reputation to worry about. There's the IP reputation, which is the technical side that we handle. And that was a lot more important about like a year ago before this went into effect. So you could really kind of hide on a good IP in the past a lot more effectively than you can now. But now domain reputation is becoming increasingly important, at least partially because of these changes. And I know we're going to talk about that a bit later on, but just wanted to add on that point too.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Sandra.
Yeah, and just to kind of break down that the technical requirements a bit more that Al was talking about, just a really brief explainer about what SPF, DKIM, and DMARC do. These are little DNS records that you add to your domain wherever you manage that. Could be GoDaddy, could be Google, could be whoever. And SPF really all it's doing is it's just saying we authorize this platform servers to send mail on our behalf. So, for example, if you're using every action, you would add the include tag for every action to your DNS editor. And whenever you sent from targeted email, a mailbox provider would know, hey, that's fine. They're authorizing that. DKIM works similarly in a way. It's another DNS record, but it's a little signature that goes directly in the email and says, yes, this is from my domain. I'm authorizing this. No one is intentionally trying to spoof me or something. You can accept it. DMARC is kind of an add-on to this. It tells a mailbox provider what to do if SPF and DKIM fail. So you have three options. You can do nothing, P equals none. You can quarantine. You can tell mailbox providers, yeah, send this to spam if SPF or DKIM fail. Or you can just outright reject the mail with the reject policy, which says, yeah, if your Gmail and DKIM fails, don't accept this at all. So that's something we help with. We provide you the records, you add them yourself, and then that is pretty much it on the technical requirements for Bonterra clients. It's really, again, about those strategic elements. Yeah, and this kind of goes back into those strategic elements. I like I mentioned before, domain reputation has become increasingly important over the past year. And every mailbox provider tends to calculate it differently, but the one thing that's universally detrimental is low engagement. So that means people not opening your emails or marking you as spam, unsubscribing in large numbers. And the opposite is obviously good engagement. And now that the sender requirements are kind of in effect, it's a lot easier for once you authenticate for a mailbox provider to say, hey, this person generally sends good mail. We're going to tag them with a good reputation. They can maybe go to the inbox. We can accept their mail at the rate that they want. They're sending consistently. They're all good. But the opposite is true if you have low engagement. It's not impossible to fix that situation. That's something we can help with if you run into it. It's something I do all the time. But really just want to highlight that low engagement signals are universally detrimental, and domain reputation is increasingly important now.
Now, when we talk about domain reputation, we are talking about domains measured a few different ways. Of course, we're talking about the from domain. But if you're a bit of an email nerd, you're pulling apart headers, you can see there's a return path domain, sometimes called the bounce domain or SPF domain. That can sometimes have a different domain in it, or you could have different domains in the links in the body of your message. All of those domains have their own reputation. So anytime you use a domain, in any place in your message, if it has a very poor reputation because it's also being used in spam, that is going to sort of drag down your reputation, impeding your ability to get mail reliably delivered to the inbox. So, in a way, if you really want to get icky with the metaphors, sharing domains can be like sharing needles. It is not something you want to do. That you are better off making sure you sort of stand on your own, and that was sort of the point of all the authentication bits we talked about before, so that you can use your own domain. You're reliably identified as you and identified as just as you, so that even if you're on a shared infrastructure in a platform, any of the Bonterra platforms, every action or what have you, where you could be on a platform on a set of infrastructure shared with other people, separate domains that you send as your domain and not somebody else's and not a shared domain. That's your best way to make sure that the action of somebody else doing something silly with an email list or sending something wrong does not affect you at all. Because anytime you share a domain, anytime you share an indicator, something that connects your messages to somebody else, whatever that other person does can affect your reputation as well. That's why domain reputation is so important. It combines with authentication to let you be you and let you shine and show that you are a good sender, you are sending wanted mail, engaging mail. And this is kind of an interesting sort of sea change in spam filtering. As Sandro said, it didn't used to be that way in the past. Gmail, for example, is really good at figuring out the domains involved and whether or not they are good or bad. So if you're a good sender, that is a good thing for you. It lets you set up it means when you set up your own domains and you're authenticating everything properly, they're identifying it as you. The stats that associate with your mail show you as a good sender. They know you're a good person. They're more likely to deliver that mail to the inbox.
Yeah, thank you for bringing it back to the good senders. Sometimes I see the bad ones a little more than the good, and I'm sure you're all very good senders, so that's a good addition.
And so we talked a lot about building, talked about domain reputation or sending reputation, and how do you build that good reputation? Well, it's all about making sure that mailbox providers know that you're a good person, a good actor. Mailbox providers start suspicious because even years ago, and it's probably worse now, but years ago, a guy from Microsoft told me that 98% of the email connections that they get to their servers from somebody they've never seen before are trying to send them spam, viruses, or malware. So the vast majority of new connections are bad people doing silly things. So that's why Gmail, Microsoft, Yahoo are very suspicious of somebody who is a new sender. You're new to your IP address, you're new to your domain name. You are, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, sort of guilty until proven innocent. Now, the way to get past that is to go through a process that we call ramp up or warming. But whatever you call it, it's really just starting slow and building up volume over time. There's lots of different ways to calculate it, and that's a good reason to submit a ticket to ask Sandra about that. If you have specifics for a new list or a new client or somebody coming aboard, what does that schedule look like? But so it's going to vary, based on how big your list is and what your timing is. But it all really boils down to sending slow, limiting volume at first, and building up to big volume over time. Not showing up on day one and sending 10 million emails, because that volume spike, plus the fact that most of the time in their experience, ISPs, mailbox providers, are getting shoveled bad stuff when people do that, means they're going to be really suspicious and they won't let all of that mail through right away. You're getting lots of delays, lots of intermittent blocking. So building up good reputation means starting off slow, breaking up sends into chunks over days, limiting volume, only gradually building that volume day over day, week over week. You can get to it pretty easily within a few weeks, 3 to 6 weeks, depending on this size. You're really getting up in the millions for having to build up volume through a warming process. So it doesn't take forever. It is doable, but don't show up on, hey, we set up our account 15 minutes ago. Now we're ready to send 16 million, because that is not a surefire guarantee of deliverability success.
And we see that a lot, especially around Giving Tuesday. Just to jump in real quick, I don't know if any of you participate, but We tend to see this every year where sometimes new clients will sign up maybe right before Giving Tuesday without a ton of ramp up. And our infrastructure can typically handle like spikes like that, but it doesn't really lead to the results that you want. So that warm up is super important.
Yeah, ESP mail platforms can send mail very fast. It's always the case of it is the other side that chooses to slow it down. And it doesn't matter how big the door is that you're going out of on our platform as you send. If that door at Yahoo is only that big, you're only going to fit so many email messages through until they recognize you, until they know you're a good sender, until they widen that gateway to let you to send more mail. So good practices versus less good practices. This is really where the rubber meets the road. And it is not everybody is born knowing everything. So I understand that not everybody knows this when they first start with email. When they're using email for advocacy, for fundraising, for marketing, whatever. It's all about building up good practices to get good deliverability and good revenue success from that email. Some people do bad things, and you get some bad emails once in a while. But I always say like, yes, other people do that, but other people break into cars and steal cars. Eventually, they get caught. Right in my hometown of Chicago, there was bad guys going around stealing catalytic converters. They raided one guy's garage, and he had 300 catalytic converters stored in that garage, stolen over the past few months. Well, up until the last one, right when he was on 299, he probably thought he was doing pretty good. He was getting away with it. He was having success, and then he stole 300, and then that was enough to get the cops to figure out where those are and go after them, and everything collapsed. So if you see same thing with email in that, as weird as this is for a parallel, you see somebody get away with something bad for a short period of time. It doesn't mean they had long-term success. It doesn't mean that they definitely have revenue success. So if you see a bad person doing silly things, don't emulate that, because we know from our expertise that email success is built on best practices. Right? If you use less good practices, if you buy and trade lists, if you target poorly, right? I think of a bought list as an example of poor targeting. Right? I live in a zip code that had a highly contentious aldermanic race last year, and one of the challengers bought an email list based on zip code, emailed me and a whole bunch of other people who would never vote for this candidate in a million years, made a bunch of enemies, got a bunch of complaints, got shut off from their email platform for doing that. So in that example, they thought they were getting the message out, but what they were doing is they just made a whole bunch of neighbors angry who don't want to talk to them when they walk by them on the street now because they spammed them. So keep in mind that it's all about sending wanted mail to people who want that mail. It's going to get you higher engagement, lower complaint rates, and better delivery to the inbox.
Yeah, and just to add, sorry, I keep adding right at the end when you switch the slides, but
No worries.
no, just a quick note on purchased or rented lists. It's against Bonterra's terms of service to send to those contacts. You have to email contacts who have explicitly opted into your program. And also, I used to be a digital consultant for political and nonprofit senders. And one day we used to buy lists. Unfortunately, it's very common in the political space, as I'm sure a lot of you probably know if you live in the US and you're registered to vote. But we broke down the ROI. It's just, and it never really pays off. I know it can be tempting if you're in a fundraising position and you want to maybe juice the numbers and get like a nice little fundraising push, but it doesn't make sense financially most of the time in my experience, and it also will lead to a ton of negative signals that will impact your domain reputation, and it'll be hard to kind of claw out of that.
A friend of mine, Jeannie Jennings, did a study a couple years ago that did a head-to-head test of opt-in versus not opt-in for a fundraising list. And for her, the results were exactly like you said, Sandro. The opted-in list did better. The ROI was a lot poorer on the non-permissioned list. So that's a good point to look at, what you're actually buying and spending it on. But unfortunately, a lot of people selling list data, they lie about how recent it is, how targeted it is, even some of the attributes of the list. Their goal is to get your money, and rarely do they care about having a repeat customer in the list sale scenario.
Yeah, 100%. That's
Consistency.
interesting.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, you were going to talk to this one. All yours.
Oh no, that's okay. Yes, another really important kind of signal that you can send to a mailbox provider is sending consistently, and as consistently as possible. Makes a lot of sense. I think, like Al said, I what was the stat? 98% of mail is kind of junk or spam. The reason that consistency, or at least one of the reasons that consistency is so important in your sending schedule, is because if you ramp up very quickly, or maybe like triple your volume overnight, a lot of times a mailbox provider will treat that as a compromised account, until it's proven otherwise. So less of your mail will get through, and it's kind of sending a signal to the Gmails and Yahoos of the world that, hey, this person isn't really following best practices. We maybe shouldn't accept as much of their mail anymore, or at least until they figure this out. So consistency in your volume is super important. We recently kind of did a data analysis internally about how long between sends, how gaps can like affect your engagement. And we found that after a gap of 30 days, you're about 83% worse off in terms of bounce rate than you would be if you just kept sending consistently, even once a week. And the same was true of other metrics, including open rates, spam complaint rates, unsubscribes. You're pretty much better off in all categories by sending consistently and keeping a schedule. The same is true in all other aspects of email. So making sure that your branding and domains are consistent so that your supporters recognize you. They're not surprised to hear from you, maybe from a new domain or with entirely new branding. That's important. And I think it's mostly about just setting expectations for what someone can expect in their inbox. So they're not surprised. They're continuing to receive the wanted mail that you're sending, and you're not making any waves in kind of the wrong way, I would say.
I always look at it too, like if this was all being done manually and tracked by people, if I reached out to Yahoo and asked somebody manually to look at my history at Yahoo, if they were able to see that I reliably send every Monday to 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 people going back forever, have an average usual complaint rate, click rate, open rate, that's kind of the same week to week to week. And if I suddenly start having trouble, I reach out to them, they'll look at that history and be able to see that I'm a good person and I tend to do good things. So, in the same way, the automated filters use that regularity of practice as a reason to let you continue to mail, right? So, if you are doing the same thing with relatively good stats results coming from that, they're less likely to be suspicious. They know that you're not the problem sender, that they can go spend more CPU cycles trying to find other bad guys elsewhere. You're not part of the problem.
Well, it's interesting too that you say that, because I had the exact same situation with a client. I think it was last week, maybe, who was picked up by Apple's spam filters. I won't get into why. It was partly their fault, partly not. But I reached out to their postmaster, and they lifted the block and actually cited their consistency as like, okay, they're not doing anything too wild. I see they've addressed the issue and they send consistently, so we can go ahead and lift the block. So it's super important.
Excellent. So tools and testing. How do you make sure that you are compliant with all of these requirements? How do you see what your reputation is? And how do you monitor for phishing and spoofing? Here are three different ways you can do those things. First, going in completely backwards in silly order, in the lower right there is about my email. That is a free tester that is written by friends of mine in the email marketing community. It's primarily focused on email marketing mail, but it is great for lots of different kinds of bulk mail. What it does is it'll give you a special address. You'll send a message to that address, and it'll give you a very detailed report that will break down exactly what they see in that email message, in the headers, what's configured, and does it comply with modern sender requirements. It is extremely helpful to use this as a checklist to prove that you're complying, to know that you're complying with, in particular, the new Yahoo and Gmail requirements. Now, when we talk about reputation, how do I know what my domain reputation actually is at Gmail, for example? And that's where Google Postmaster Tools comes into play here. That's free. You sign up for it. You just have to register your domain. You'll put a little bit of text in a DNS record to prove that you own the domain. You've set up Google Workspace or Google Webmaster Tools or other stuff in a past re-verified domain. You've probably already done that process before, so it might not even be that new to you. But after you sign up, you're going to get this cool dashboard provided by Google with data from Gmail subscribers' feedback. They will have your domain reputation listed over time. You'll be able to see, is it yellow, is it green, yellow, or red? Is it good, medium, bad, or it'll help you track what's going on. And that feedback is key to know if you have a problem and help guide you in the right direction and what to do. Now, it's not a magic 8 ball that's going to give you very explicit directions on if your reputation is poor, but there's a lot of guides out there, including on my site on Spam Resource, that say if you're having Gmail reputation issues and your domain reputation is poor, here are the common steps you do to go through that. So that Gmail feedback can help guide you toward the right steps, the right process to know how to climb back to good reputation and to know when that's working, to see that reputation is growing positively, and then that it goes to high, and then it stays high over time, and that you know that you're more likely to get mail delivered reliable to the inbox as a result. And finally, 2-second plug for what my company does. Right, Valimail is a DMARC vendor. We offer tools. We're primarily focused on enterprise companies who are more focused on email security, but we also have a very robust free service called Valimail Monitor, where you can configure DMARC to send reports into our mechanism, into our service for you, where we capture those reports, feedback from the different mailbox providers, specifically on who's sending mail from your domain. Is it passing authentication? What was the disposition of that mail? In other words, did we let it through, or did Gmail let it through? Did Gmail block it? So we put that all together in a graphical dashboard for you with details that you can click into for various bits of it. And what that tells you is, number one, is somebody spoofing your mail, pretending to be you? And if so, where are they? How much are they doing? And is that mail getting through or not? Next, it lets you make sure that all of your own mail is authenticating properly. If you, in like enterprise land, we might refer to it as shadow IT. Like if you're at a big company and somebody in HR randomly signs up with a hiring service that's going to send emails on behalf of your domain, doesn't know anything about email authentication, just starts sending mail. That's an example of a shadow IT scenario where it's not authenticating properly. IT and security didn't know about it. It's probably not getting to inboxes reliably. You need to be able to find that stuff and identify it so that you can help the user configure it properly, or maybe redirect them to a different service that's better in line with your security requirements, so that you can protect your domain against unauthorized usage. So that's sort of the goal of DMARC. Sandro talked about policies for DMARC before, and sort of the end goal with DMARC is to be able to set a policy of reject for your domain, which what that does is it tells Gmail, Yahoo, Microsoft, all these different mailbox providers. If a message purports to be from your domain, but it doesn't authenticate properly, meaning it's probably phishing or spoofing, don't deliver it, reject it. So all of that comes together to let you make sure you're authenticating properly, watch for phishing and spoofing, and protect your domain. And that's what a DMARC tool like Valid Mail Monitor can help you do. Learning more there too. I also have my blog, spamresource.com. I am all about getting as much attention to myself as possible. So of course I had to sneak my blog in there, but then there's links to all the other stuff too. The good thing about my spam resource blog is you see on the examples on the side there, I've got a whole section where we define these terms, like GPT, DMARC, DKIM, SPF, spam house. All these different things are explained, and I try to guide you through how they actually all relate to getting your email delivered. And I've got an email newsletter there where I send it out weekly. So please feel free to sign up. And if you want to learn more about email deliverability, I'd be happy to help you along that journey.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. Al, I'm going to drop your blog here in the chat. So if folks want to click in, they can do that right ahead. But thank you so much for this presentation. Lots of great information, lots of things that I did not know. I did not know some of the inner workings of email deliverability and how kind of complex it can be, but very interesting. And I'm sure folks on the call feel similarly. But want to transition over to Q&A quickly before we do that, everyone. I do want to just ask if you are interested in kind of learning more about Bonterra's tools and services and how we can help you with your email deliverability. I am going to go ahead and launch another quick poll here. Feel free to fill that out. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we will have one of our colleagues reach out to you after we wrap up this afternoon here. But while folks are filling that out, I figure we can get to maybe some Q&A. I did see a question come in earlier from Ophelia, and I believe this is in regards to, Al, some of the things that you were talking about in regards to good and bad practices. But Ophelia asked whether or not the time of the message set makes a difference in good or bad practice.
That's a really good question. Now, the short answer is it doesn't matter so much for whether or not it's going to get delivered to the inbox. It's really more a question of what is the best time to send in a given day to match up with when is this subscriber most likely to open and read that message. But even then, when you reframe the question that way, it's kind of a tricky one, and there's no single answer. Because if I tell you Tuesday, and if I put up a blog post that says everybody send on Tuesday, that gets you the most opens, then everybody starts sending on Tuesday, and everybody's inboxes are overwhelmed, and actually stats will decline. Engagement will be diluted because few people will be able to catch up, keep up with all the stuff hitting their inbox on Tuesday. So it really depends on your subscriber base and who you're targeting. My spam resource email newsletter, most of my subscribers tend to be B2B people in B2B companies that are sending B2C marketing messages. So they're typically working a 9 to 5 office schedule, whether that be in an office or at home. So I target them. I send to them Monday mornings first thing. So at about 9 a.m. So when they come into the office, hopefully I'm hitting their inbox right as they're getting into it for the work week, and maybe I can give them some guidance that'll help them through that work week. So that's what makes sense for me. Be different too. Like there's studies, if you search based on your target industry and look at what other people are doing, that's probably the best way to learn what a good time to send is, right? If it's like my friend's mommy focused Substack, a lot of people say, after dinner or even after bedtime is better because that's when moms are more likely to sit down and have that time to go through their emails. So it's really going to vary based on the target audience.
Yeah, and one thing too is you're kind of competing for space and attention in people's inboxes. So it really does depend on your specific niche that you're sending in. But I think I remember this sort of vaguely. I wish I could cite the actual number, but in a different webinar, maybe 6 months ago, someone from Microsoft said that like 95% of marketing mail is sent at the hour or at the half hour mark.
Oh yeah, I know where you're going with this. That's great advice.
Yes. So I think it's like one of the rare circumstances where, well, not rare, but it's a kind of unique circumstance where the strategic element intersects with the technical element, it's a lot easier for Microsoft to accept things at 9:17 versus 9:30 on the dot. So kind of offsetting it can help, and it also can really help with getting the attention of like somebody who's opening their email. They're not getting a ton of other things at that exact time, so it can theoretically help your open rates too.
Good call out, Sandro. I will now be sending our webinar invites at a little odd time. Good to know. Awesome. I don't see any other questions funneling through, but I'll give folks a couple of seconds here. But while they're getting in their last minute questions, again, Sandro, Al, I want to thank you both for your time this afternoon. Thank you for such an insightful presentation. And folks on the line, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for taking time out of maybe your lunch or your breakfast. We really appreciate it. We appreciate the engagement in the chat and Q&A. It always makes for a great session, and we definitely hope to see you at our next one. So with that, if there aren't any additional questions, we'll wrap up here. But if you do have any, feel free to reach out to one of us after today's session, and we're more than happy to do that. And we'll be sending out the recording of this session, like I mentioned earlier, next week. So be on the lookout for that. I think we have one last minute question come in if we have time for it. We have a question. Did I hear you right in saying that we should only send email from a single platform?
No, it's not necessarily. I probably got that mangled when I was saying that some people use different platforms for different things. And there's not an inherent limitation like through the lens of email authentication or even reputation. There's not a limiter there that says it all has to be from one platform. If you look at even the smallest of small businesses tends to be using at least two platforms, right? If you're using an email marketing platform or automation platform and you're using Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace for one-to-one email. So even in that little instance, you're already using two platforms. And it is perfectly compatible with reputation and email authentication settings to configure things so that you can support sending from multiple platforms. What you want to keep in mind is what we talked about with regard to domain reputation and the really icky parallel I made to sharing domains being like sharing needles. If you've got three platforms that you're sending from, all using the same domain, and if you do bad things on just one of them, it will damage deliverability success for the other two, even if the other two are all on the right side of the bright line of email permission and best practices. Because that domain, if it's the domain is shared across all of them, negative impact, negative feedback to that domain, it will carry across to all the places that that domain is used.
Awesome. Well, glad we got that last minute question. I'm glad I hadn't let folks off beforehand. Awesome. And again, yeah, folks, we will send out the recording of this session sometime next week. Be on the lookout for that. And we really appreciate, again, your time this afternoon. And we hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. Again, thank you, Sandra and Al, for your time as well.